How do you do graphs in Python? So a very important library for graphs is Matplotlib. And this library comes with so much useful functionality that you must use it to appreciate what it can do for you. So here we are using the import keyword and we're bringing in this library. This library, you can see it's a module, and then we are also accessing a submodule called PyPlot where all the magic happens. So we are labeling this as PLT. So this is the alias we use to access or refer to this library that we are going to access. Here you can see the referrer to the PLT, which we have here, and then we are going to call a function. Now notice here, this is a function. This function takes in the arguments. So you can see here that we are passing it the arguments of X values and the Y values. Then we are labeling the x-axis. Notice here the PLT is being constantly used. Again, we add the title to this and then we call the show command. So if I were to run this command over here, you can see my graph has refreshed, or I can do clear outputs and run this. And here you can see the graph. The graph has a title. It has the label for the y-axis, which is temperature. It has a label for the x-axis, which is time. And you can see it has drawn the line here to represent our data over here. So you can see, for example, the point here on the x-axis 3, which is over here. And then you can see this ties in with the point 6 on the y-axis, which ties in with point 6 here. So the 6 here, this draws the line over here. So how this works is we've got the x-axis going all the way up, and it goes all the way up to the 6 over here. So that's why you end up with a line going over there. So this is the simplest graph you can do in Python using Matplotlib and using its submodule called PyPlot. Did you see how easy it was to draw a graph? But how do you draw another line on this graph? And this is what we'll take a look at in the next video. So as demonstrated, you can use Matplotlib to draw a graph like the one shown here, where you can draw a single line. But how do you do a graph that has two lines? For example, another line like this. So you can see here that we're accessing a module. This module we're calling a function called plot. So how do you do a new graph in Python without the use of any variables? So it's very simple. All you need to do is, this is our first data over here, and then you call the pyplot function again, and you just pass it a different data that you want to plot. So here you can label the data like this. So this data is from sensor A, this data is from sensor B. And then you can show a legend to show you the colors of the line. So if we have a look at the graph, you can see here that we have two lines, one in orange and one in blue. And you can see we also have a legend. The blue one is for sensor A and the orange one for sensor B. This has drawn both lines on the same axis. So the axes have stayed the same. So what was the difference? So if you look at the old graph here, you can see that we only had one pyplot function being called, and the new one basically has two pyplot functions being called. This is for our first dataset and this is for the second. In the background, what Matplotlib does is whenever you call the plot function, it creates another line for you. And you can see that you can pass in the label property. We could have done it for this line here, but it would have been pointless because we only have one data point or one dataset that we wanted to print on the graph. But now we have two datasets, we labeled them, and these labels show up because we said that we wanted to add a legend using the PLT alias that we defined over here. So now you end up with a nice looking graph which has a legend and two lines in it. So just remember, all you need to do is call the plot function twice and you will get your two lines on the graph. How do you change the color of these lines drawn on a graph? So with Matplotlib, you can see here that we created the graph using the plot function. So we created the first line over here and the second line. Notice that we called the plot function twice and it drew the lines on the same graph and it automatically gave them a blue color and orange color. And you can see that on your graph appearing like this. But how do you change the colors of these lines? So what you can do here is type the word color in and then type in which color that you want. So for example, I want that first line for sensor A to be red. At the minute, you can see that the red doesn't apply, so it was blue. So what we want to do is we want to change this blue line into a red line. So by just simply including the color argument here and assigning the value red to it, it will change the color of the graph. Now, separating this argument, what you need to do is put a comma in place there. So now if we run this, you can see our line has now changed into red. red over there and red over here. But a lot of time, what you want to do is you want to change the second line as well. So what you can do is same thing as before. So you can type the word color, notice the American spelling, and then in here, for example, we can type green and then comma and then the label. So now this line will be red for sensor A and the green line will be for sensor B. So currently, as you can see on the graph, because I haven't run the code, it's red and blue. So by running this code over here, so we can click this execute button over here and this will refresh our graph. And now you can see that we have refreshed our graph and we can see the green line for sensor B and the red line for sensor A. Rather than manually typing in colors like this, what you can do is if you are very specific with your colors, you can use the hex values directly in VS Code. So here, for example, I've got the green color. So what you can do is you can type in a hex value like so that when you type it in, you will get the color selector on the side. So this color selector will let you change the value hex code over here. And then what you can do is you can change it to any color that you want. So we had the green one and then you can select the specific green one over here. So if, for example, we select this green over here, and then when you run your code, you can see that your graph now has the green color that you selected over here. So this is better than having to remember the different colors, and especially if you are wanting to get your branding in. So if you are looking for a specific color, you can do it like that. Another way you can do it is specifying the red, green, and blue. So here, what you can do is rather than doing like that, we can also do it in this format, which is the red, green, blue combination. So for example, we can do 0.1 here, 0.5 and 0.8. So if I were to run this, you can see that our line has changed color accordingly. If I were to change one of these values, you can see that the line changes color. So here we now have this turquoise color assigned by the values that we typed in here for red, green, blue. But notice here, you don't get the color selector. With the hex value, you automatically get a color selector built into VS Code, which means it's as easy as going here and then selecting whichever color you want, for example, and then running your code, and you can see your line has changed the color to the one that you selected here. There are two ways to start a plot in Python. This is using the Matplotlib library. So one of the methods is I've highlighted here, and you can see what we are doing here is individual line is declared for each plot that we want to create. And what I mean by plot is individual lines on the graph. For example, as you can see here, there's a line here and there's a line here. So one is a blue line and one is an orange line. And these lines are created by this plot function that comes from Matplotlib library. Another way you can do is rather than create these individually like this is you can create them all at once by using this method over here. So this method over here doesn't do it separately one line at a time. So it doesn't call the plot function multiple times. Instead, it just calls it one time over here. The disadvantage with this method over here is that you cannot define things like color, the label, and amongst other things, the structure of the line. So you're reliant on Matplotlib automatically deciding these elements for you, although you can edit them later, but it becomes very messy to do so. My best advice is to stick with this format where you call the plot function individually for all the different data sets that you want to plot, rather than embedding them like this in a single plot function. So just to demonstrate this, I will comment our code out over there and just run this. And you can see here, the graph has been generated with the 3 lines that we have over here. These 3 lines have come from 1, 2, and 3 data sets that we had here. Now, there is one very peculiar situation with Matplotlib where you probably see that you seem to be calling the plot function, but you're not storing it in a variable. So for example, here you can see we're defining the color of the line to be red, and we are defining the label here to be sensor A, and you can see then we call the plot function again, and it all seems to be plotting on the same axis. So as you can see here, multiple lines are all going onto the same graph. So the problem that you see with this is that you cannot change the properties of these lines because you haven't got a reference point to refer to. So one of the things that you can do is declare a variable in front of this. So I could call this one line1, and that would be your first dataset line. And then we can call this line 2. And then for this one, this is where we are plotting multiple lines using one plot function. And this is what I want to show you is a very important and peculiar difference. If I go here and type in lines, so this will have multiple lines. So we've got variable here, line 1, variable here, and variable here. So if I were to run this piece of code, next thing I want to do is you can see all the lines that have been plotted at the various data points, but they are all on one single graph. Now let's examine what's actually happening behind these variables. So what we will do is we will click on this button for Jupyter variables. And what this button will do is show you all the variables. So if we click onto that, they are in memory at this current time. So if we have a look at line 1, line 2, and lines, you can see how the values are stored. So if I just expand this, you can see line 1 has a list, but only one item inside it. Line 2 also has a list and one item inside it. But if you look at line 3 over here, it's got 1, 2, and 3. So if I expand this even further, you can see there is a third item over here. So notice that these are lists over here. So that's the list and this is a list. So when we come to manipulate this data, which we will do in the next explanation, we need to understand that these are list data types that get stored into these variables. So you can see here, we set the color here, but what if you want to change the color later on in your code? How would you do that? So previously you've seen that we've set the variables here, but these variables will not work. So if I run this code over here and have a look at the Jupyter variables here and click that button, and you can see the variable type here for line 1, line 2, and lines is list. So this is important. If it's a list data type, you cannot work with it like a normal variable. So if I close this down and have a look at this, so what you need to do is you need to unpack this item, or what we need to do is destructure this item over here. So to do that, what you do is you add a comma here, and what that will do is it will destructure this list over here. So if we see the effect of this, so if I run this and go back to Jupyter variables, and now what you can see is notice that the data type has changed. Whereas previously it was a list, now for line 1 is actually line 2D. So this data type has its properties. It's an object. So if we go over here, now for line 1, what we can do is if we start typing the code, and what you can see, you get options such as set color. In that color, you can say, I want, for example, yellow line. So previously, you can see it was red, but we changed it here to yellow. So if I just comment this line out for here, toggle comment block, and that will comment it out and run this code again. And you can see that we have a yellow line here. Although initially we set it as green, but it's now changed to yellow. So the comma here is very important because it converts it to the right data type. This is known as destructuring or unpacking the variable on the right, or the item on the right. Because for line 2, you can see because it's a list still and there is no comma here, so there is no comma there after the variable name, you cannot do set color. It doesn't come up with the option of set color. So if we try and change this to red, you can see, and when I try and run this code, you get an error to say that set color is not a valid option for line 2. So we have to use a comma to convert it into the correct object, and this is known as destructuring or unpacking a list. So previously I talked about destructuring your list by using a comma. So here we have a graph that is generated by Matplotlib. We're using the plot function to generate this, but what happens is behind the scenes, Matplotlib puts this in a list. So if we run this code over here, and if we go to Jupyter variables up here, this gives you this screen over here, and it shows you all the variables that are in the memory at this point. So for line 1, you can see that we used a comma and it converted it to the correct data type. So it basically converted the item in the list. But remember, the item on the list has to be exactly one item. So if we expand this over here, you can see for lines, it's actually multiple items over here. But for line 2 and line 1, we only have one item. And you can see the reason for one item is because it's only a single line. But for lines over here, and I commented this code out, but I will uncomment it by going to edit and toggle the comment block, and it removes that. Now, what you can see is this lines actually had multiple plots within it. So 1, 2, 3. So that's what you have, 1, 2, and 3. So So here, by converting the line 1 with a comma or unpacking it or destructuring it, we were able to get this item line 2D. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do this is, so if we can rename this variable as line list, for example, and then what we do is that line list, we will now have line 2 over here, and then we will select from the line list the first item in that list. And then line 2 would have the set color method. So over here, for example, we can change that to be green, or should we change it to red? I think we'll change this one, line 2 to red. And if I run this, you can see now the Jupyter variable over here. The window for that can be obtained by clicking this button. And once you have this, you can see line list here is a list type, and line 2 now matches this. So now there are two ways to do this. You could use a comma, or you could use the longer traditional method of converting a list into a single item in this fashion. This method here, line 1 with a comma, is of course shorter and more idiomatic and easier, while this method over here is longer and traditional. Both work, but I prefer the shorter syntax for ease of use, although this adds a note of clarity as to what is happening. So this one, you can clearly see a list is obtained, and then a single item from the list is obtained. This is doing the same thing, but much shorter. So previously we used this unpacking shorter syntax or idiomatic syntax to convert a single list item we had on the right hand side to a single variable over here. So what that basically did was we had a list date type and it converted it into an actual date type that Matplotlib used, which is line 2D. So you can see here we did it the old fashioned way, or the traditional method, which is we stored the list here. So line list over here is a list. And then what we did is we used the traditional method to get the first item. Now, since there is only one item in the line list, the position is 0 based, so the first item is selected. But what happens when you have multiple items? So see here, lines, which comes from over here. So this over here has multiple items in it. And you can see here, the lines here has 3 items inside it. And those 3 items are one over here, and then they're separated by a comma. This is the second item, and this is the third item over here. We can't see it on the screen, as we will need to, if I just hover over, you can see actually the third item in the tooltip. So you might be thinking, could I use this syntax, idiomatic short syntax, to extract one of these items out? The answer is no. So you cannot use this syntax, for example, like this. If you try and do it, you can see it doesn't have any errors at the minute, but if you try to run this code over here, you will now get an error. So you can see there's been a problem. And if we have a look at the error, it says value error, too many values to unpack, expected 1. So it can only unpack if you had one item. So if we were to take out these additional items over here, so get rid of them, then this syntax will work. So if I were to run this again, you can see that it succeeded. Here there is no issues. So if we have a look at the variables, you can see even the line variable now works and is converted it to a 2D item. But if you have multiple items here like this, then this will not work. Instead, what you will need to do is use the traditional method, which is like this one. So we'll just take that and paste it over here. And what we can do is we can say this comes from lines and select the second item, which will be in position 1, and we'll call this line 3. And if we run this code over here, you can see that line 3 is actually the 2D line object as well, which we extracted using the traditional method. So you cannot use a comma syntax over here. Instead, you must use the traditional method. Otherwise, you will receive an error if you try to do this, or if you do try to do a comma, then it will say they cannot do it. This is because the shorter syntax only expects one list item on this side of the equal sign.